In a nutshell, we identified that there are these three key dimensions or attributes that we're able to use to predict the likelihood of an employee adopting a new system. And in fact, these three dimensions relate to an individual's sense of identity. How does an individual feel about IT in general? The second attribute has a lot to do with how open an individual is to change. And then the third attribute is essentially how impacted a job role is when we implement that new system. Let's say you're an IT leader, a functional leader within an organization, you're about to proceed with a new implementation. Step one, identify the key stakeholder groups. Step number two, these simple surveys, questionnaires, very easy to administer. Once you collect the feedback, you can start mapping some of these groups to those archetypes. And then the next step really is, armed with that information, there's guidance on how to alter or change your messaging, how to change your enablement. And the goal again is to get alignment. And so once you do it once you do it twice, you're never going to go back, because now you're really finding a way to cater the message, the value to the needs of the individuals. So it becomes like a flywheel.
Welcome to the new automation mindset, where AI, automation, and integration come together. I'm your host, Markus Zirn, and as Chief Strategy Officer and part of the founding executive team at Workato, it is my mission to find these top innovators in AI, automation, and integration and share their journeys with all of you. So today, I'm very excited to have as my guest Sena. He's the global head of business systems at Big ID, and he's been a customer Workato now twice, I believe, right? Also when you were VP business technology at Diligent. But that is not why we're here today. So we actually got something even more fun, I believe, and it's a passion project of Sam's. Because on the side to being an IT executive, he's also an executive PhD researcher, and actually at the famous Sorbonne University of Paris. And his topic is IT identities, which are information systems adoption archetypes. So that's a mouthful, all right. But but the way I kind of at least understand it, Sam will tell us in a second, is if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs personality types, I think you kind of got it. Is what Sam is researching into similar personality types, but very specific to IT systems adoption. So look, for me, change management is so important in IT projects. I mean, that resistance to change it's in all of us. I mean, I have it. It comes up. We're getting comfortable with certain things, and we don't want to change. And it's very real, and it really matters in IT projects. And so Sam's research, it caught my attention, and we will also make some of the content that Sam provided for the original research. Will make that available, so you guys can read on that. But with this said, enough of a kind of setup. Sam, tell us a little bit, maybe the context. First, how did you get interested in IT adoption archetypes into that topic? What led you there?
Absolutely. So first of all, Markus, thank you for having me. I'm an avid listener of the pod. I'm a 3-time customer, actually, because we acquired a company that was also a Workato customer. So I like to say I'm a 3-time customer, and I'm just really excited to be here. So look, in my last role as VP of Business Technology, I was responsible for post-merger integration at over 21 acquisitions inside the software industry. And I was first reporting up to the executive office of the CTO, and later moved over to the CFO. For a lot of these large-scale transformations, once you acquire a company, one of your first priorities is to get employees talking, right? So you're trying to get them on the same platforms as soon as possible. You can facilitate knowledge sharing, you can facilitate information sharing, and we noticed a lot of friction from leaders and their teams when it came to adopting a specific tool. And Marcus, I spoke to change experts at renowned management consulting firms, and they all came back with the same thing. It's just resistance to change. That's how people are, you know. But I felt that there was something deeper there. And that set me on a 4-year journey to do my own independent research with the Pantheon Sorbonne Doctoral School of Management and also ESCP, which is a leading French business school. And the findings I'm about to share have been presented at leading academic conferences in Madrid and the USA and will be published in an academic journal in the coming months.
That's pretty awesome. So you keep the suspense. You tell us like why, but give us an overview. Give us like the 2 minutes. Like what's your finding? Maybe. I mean, there's lots of questions I have. We also want to apply this to Workato a little bit. So I'm really curious about that. But before we go there, let's give us the findings. Like what have you learned? 4 years of research.
Absolutely. So, in a nutshell, we identified that there are these 3 key dimensions or attributes that we're able to use to predict the likelihood of an employee adopting a new system. And in fact, these 3 dimensions relate to an individual's sense of identity, and they come together in unique combinations that can be mapped to what we're calling IT identity archetypes. I know it's a mouthful. This academia will probably come up with a more catchy name. But essentially, the 3 dimensions relate to this, right? How does an individual feel about IT in general? I mean, look, you probably, have that friend we've all come across in life. Apple comes out with a new iPhone. They're the first person to go buy it, right? There's this new device. So people inside and outside of work, they just like technology in general, and it's part of their identity. The second attribute has a lot to do with how open an individual is to change, right? So some people, they actually embrace change. It's part of who they are. They like trying new things. In other cases, people shirk change, right? They go away from that. And then the third attribute is essentially how impacted a job role is when we implement that new system. Right? So it's one thing if you log into a system every other week versus day in, day out. This is key to, performing your job role. So how is that impact? And so when you take these 3 attributes, we found through our research that you can actually come up with, there's a very simple way to rate it, and you can come up with 8 unique combinations. So 8 archetypes. And so kind of bringing all that back, right, to the audience. So practically, what does this mean? It just basically says there's a very rapid way to baseline within your organization, right, groups of employees or key stakeholders who are about to go through a new system implementation, right? And it's as simple as distributing a simple survey. And once we get the responses from the survey, we can map them to specific enablement programs, and they help to align the value of the technology, what we're trying to do as change agents, right? Workato is a good example of that, and how we align that with the interests of the individuals. And the exciting thing is, some of our initial findings from our research is that organizations can experience an increase in adoption by as much as 20 to 25% by making some small changes to their transformation programs.
Mm-hmm. No, this is cool. And so you looked at individual people, right? Or do you feel that also has a expression on like a whole company? MIT has this, I don't know if you've seen it, MIT has a cultural index for companies. It's actually public, it's on the website. It's fascinating, where they kind of basically say, like, in terms of a couple of dimensions also, this is the culture in this company. I have a feeling what you research is probably has applicability to both, right? But I think the individual person is important.
That's a great question. So yeah, absolutely. It turns out when it comes to identity, and this is research that goes back decades. when it comes to identity, identity can exist at different levels. So, first of all, we as individuals, right? I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm a coworker. So we can have multiple identities. Teams can also assume identities, right? So I think anyone listening to this podcast who's been a leader, right? You're responsible for getting your troops fired up, and we got to go, take on this goal or objective. So it's definitely an ethos of a team. And there's also this sense that within an organization, right, an organization can have its own unique identity. So, for example, you have your Microsofties, you have your Googlers, right? I think a lot of folks within that. And so, yes, so there is an influence. Fundamentally, this starts from the individual. But when you think about the second dimension, I mentioned it briefly, that's how open you are to change. Some organizations, just by the nature of the type of, let's say you're in a startup, right? You're just rapidly adopting new things. And so there's this point of intersection where people who they don't feel comfortable with change, after a while, they self-select out of these organizations. They just don't feel comfortable there. So yes, absolutely. We start with the individual level, but yes, when you actually aggregate up, there are common identifiers.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, so we got the theory kind of out there. So what, you remember when we met, what went through my brain was really, okay, I want to apply this. This actually really is really good. And I can tell later a couple stories how in my life, I was confronted with change management. It was a big thing. So I do feel that this is real. This is good. I want to exercise this with the focus on Workato. Okay, so Workato is one of these things. I mean, it's a disruptive technology. It's kind of there is definitely change involved to traditional integration technologies. Let's apply this to a couple of things. So let's maybe start with the first one. And the first question I had, just get your expert opinion. So I've been now at Workato since the very beginning, 10 years, a little over 10 years. There is a paradox that I have encountered because, you think about Workato, it's faster, it's easier to use. Some of our mission was to actually make integration accessible to more people out there. But then the paradox is you would imagine that like the everyday people would really get excited about Workato. The paradox is that it actually tends to be the more technical people that actually get excited about Workato. So you go like, it's a less technical product, and the more technical people get excited about it. Curious, when you think about your research, what's going on here? What's going on?
That's a great question. So in fact, one of our archetypes is called the technophile. So let me tell you a bit about the technophile. So a technophile is an individual who scores really high on IT identity. That's an individual who they love technology. It's part of who they are. Inside, outside of work, they're trying new things. It's a big part of their ethos. Even more so at work, technology is a big part of how they project their individual identity through their colleagues. So this individual may be an expert. They may be an enabler. They may be a trainer. They're the go-to person within the organization. And so what Workato and a lot of these transformative tools represent is an opportunity for them to reach a broader audience, right? So now they're not just working with a small team. They actually now have an excuse. I can be in a call with marketing. I can be a call with our HR team, with our operations team. I have tools that get me into different rooms of the organization. And so that's very empowering, right? Also, we found in our research that people who score very high in ITID, they tend to have a very low bias to change, right? Not everyone, but people who like to adopt technology, it's part of their persona. When there's a new, shiny new technology, it's something that they find very interesting, more so because they're one of the early adopters. So they don't want to be, hey, we rolled this out and then, we're already done and then we involve you later. People like this want to be involved early on because they can be trusted as ambassadors.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think that's probably what's happening there. It's fascinating. I mean, little interesting fact, like in Tel Aviv, all right. Workato has 160 customers in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is, oh my God, it's not even half of Los Angeles, if you think about it. I mean, the whole country of Israel is like 3/4 of Los Angeles. I mean, I can tell you we don't have 160 customers in Los Angeles. So there's definitely something going on. And I believe Tel Aviv is kind of a second Silicon Valley. But also, I think the culture is very early adopter-ish. I think there is a lot. I think it's also not very top-down. It's a very much everyone. It's a very entrepreneurial kind of a culture. I believe what we're seeing, and I believe some of this is happening not just in an individual, but on a cultural identity basis there. And I believe that's what's going on. All right. Well, now this is good. Let's go to the other side. So we found a couple of people where, Workato, I mean, there seems to be some affinity based on their identity. Let's go to the other side, friction. What's going on? Change management. I think what's most interesting is like what's blocking change, or why might there be fear in change? And Workato is definitely a change, right? I mean, we said the good old world used to be there's only a few central specialists that can do integrations, and now it's more people. I think the speed of integration has increased quite a bit. At least the big mission of Workato was really to not look at integration as just moving data, right? But look at that end-to-end process view, and think of business processes when you do integration, which all sounds great, and hopefully it is. I mean, I've spent 10 years of my life on this, but what I do notice is that there's obviously, because there's this change, it feels like a threat to some people, and obviously that's kind of really obvious, is like specialists, these integration specialists of the past, right? They do feel threatened by something that maybe makes them less important than before. The other one thing that is also interesting, there's some customers where you realize, we come with this benefit of, giving a business process, end-to-end business process perspective, but then you see companies that are really not structured that way, where almost like IT is structured in application silos. And so they go like, well, why? I mean, it's fine moving data around. I just look at integration around just my app, like one of 20. Like, why would I need to look at an end-to-end business process? So I'm just curious. I mean, does that make sense also for you? Like, what do you see going on there? And how does that map to your identities? And then maybe you have some ideas of what we could do, or what our customers can also do to get a more rapid adoption of something like Workato.
Yeah, it's a great question. And before I start off, just want to say I have a lot of experience working with Israeli teams. And when I was in the Singapore Air Force, I also trained with the Israelis. And there's definitely a bias to be highly technical. I do feel there is that element that I noticed as well, just a level of precision and actual pride in actually being those early adopters. So just wanted to say, I totally agree with what you said. Going back to the question, encountering individuals, first of all, I feel Workato is an amazing platform that potentially upends things. And it's such a relevant question you ask today, because organizations are doing that already and are continuing to do that with Gen AI. And there's a lot of fear that our employees are experiencing, whether we acknowledge it or not. There's this question, what will this do to my job, right? How do we quell that fear? I think as change agents, it's something that we need to adopt, right? We need to approach, we need to respond to it. We can't ignore it. And so kind of going back to the research, going back to your question, right? Like we found from our research that some individuals, you know, there's an archetype. We call it the zealot. And when I bring it up, I think, you know, yourself, Markus, and some of our listeners may actually have people you've worked with who you definitely can relate to. That's a zealot. And essentially a zealot is a person who, you know, they've spent their entire career building up this persona that they're an expert. They are the go-to person. They could be highly technical. They could be a process expert, may not just be purely a tool or technology, but people go to that individual. And that's something they pride themselves on. It's a big part of their identity, right? I think we could probably all look at our work environment and we could find someone who matches that. Now, you know, the traditional approach when you implement a new technology, and we encountered this, so this really comes from personal experience. You go in to do a transformation and you swap out a tool. And typically, right, the approach is you look at a new technology, you try to sell, you try to communicate, you try to enhance adoption. What do? We talk about the features. This is an amazing tool. It's going to save you time. It's going to speed things up. It's going to automate. It's going to reduce friction, right? In some flavor or another, there's a list of capabilities that we are trying to sell our users, our internal customers on. Well, the interesting thing is when you look at this zealot, right, it's actually missing the mark entirely. What do I mean by that? Well, if you have an individual, they spent their entire time fixated on being the expert of a particular tool or process. And what are you doing right now? You're coming in to upend that world. You're coming in with a tool or a platform that's going to change how they do things. It could potentially diminish their significance. It could cause an impact on their identity, how they identify, how people perceive them. And so what do you do, right? Interestingly, a simple pivot, instead of saying, hey, we're going to save all this time, we're going to save all these features. Well, that individual may be thinking, well, that's fine, but really what's in it for me, right? If you want to get an individual to adopt, how do we align with their interests? And the answer is, well, we could say, listen, this tool, and Workato's a great example, implemented it a couple of times, so I know what I'm saying. You go to those technical individuals and you say, listen, there is a pathway, there's an academy, there's training. We're going to invest in you. We're going to turn you from being this expert to being the go-to person, not just for this team, but across the organization. We're expanding your exposure, we're expanding your scope. You're not just helping a small team, you're helping widespread change. We're going to make sure we're investing in you so you rebuild that persona, you realign what's important to you as we implement this new technology. So the traditional view of a one-size-fits-all enablement, one-size-fits-all training, that's missing the mark a lot of the time. And I think that's probably one of the key insights from this research. You don't need to customize. There's 8 archetypes. At the very most, you're not going to need 8 different messages. You just need to tweak things a bit, and you're going to get greater adoption.
That's such a great point, because I think some of this fear is, as you said, it's a fear of change, but then because people have fear, they might actually overlook that it's a real opportunity for them, that their expertise is going to be even more relevant than it was before. And I think just like also often we overproject the fear and don't realize that, hey, this is only going to get bigger. And the reality is that Workato, while it makes things simpler. It's still such a vast platform that actually needs someone to know it all. I would actually argue that the vast population of Workato users underutilize everything that's there because there's so much there. I mean, if you want to know all of it, I mean, you still need these people. Plus, you can enable more people. So the role for the zealot, as you said, is probably gonna get bigger. But you have to make that point. Okay, all right. This is really cool. So we did talk about Israel, right? Tel Aviv. Now you guys hear my accent. You know, I grew up in Germany, right? So just to get to the other side of the spectrum, I mean, Germany definitely not the world champions in change. That's for sure. I mean, I would say, Germans as a culture are very, very quality obsessed, right? I think made in Germany. But at the same time, like, change is not one of the strong points. Actually, the funny thing, like with the zealots that you mentioned, I'm not sure if the audience knows, but in Germany, there's this model of what's called Meister, or the master of something, which is kind of like it. Basically, the education system was promoting these experts, these zealots, to be like really respected people. Started in the Middle Age. But let's go. So the one thing that is, and this is where I mention Germany also, that I wanted to get to, is one of the really big things, and I believe that if people get there with Workato, I think they reach the potential, is to basically, we said, democratize, get more people involved, but the real big thing is changing the relationship between IT and the business side, the operation side. That intersection, that kind of relationship, partnership of the IT organization and the business people who have the requirements, who run the operations. I think, I do believe in Tel Aviv, sometimes it's one and the same people. That's where you don't even have two people. And in Germany, it's very much like people would go like, well, don't do my job. It's like, I do this and you do that. But I think when you want to use Workato really well, this relationship between IT and business changes. And that's a change. And it's also something that where there is friction. How do you model that with the archetypes to get some of, helping someone who's an IT leader really to redefine and affect that change between how IT and business works together and collaborates together?
It's a great question as well. So I think the important thing here is to understand that this concept of identities is very core to who we are. And I think I mentioned that we as individuals, we actually have multiple identities. So this is theory, again, going back decades. Like I mentioned, I'm a father, I'm a son, right? I'm a partner, but also I have a professional identity. And depending on the context I'm in, it turns out that our identities, they have multiple identities, they actually align themselves hierarchically depending on the context we're in. So when you're, for example, a leader speaking in front of a crowd, there's a very dominant, maybe public speaking expert side of your persona that becomes dominant while you're in that context. The important thing to understand, the insight is that no one really has a set identity and it's fixed throughout every context. And so the challenge is going to be, and I think organizations have to acknowledge this, as you're adopting new technologies, right? Because really a lot of the work we perform today is through the technologies we use. That's why this was so interesting for me, this topic. Depending on those three dimensions we talked about, right? So IT identity, that's the core, that doesn't really change much. If you love technology, that's part of your identity, that really doesn't change as much. But what about your role? What if this tool we're implementing doesn't impact you as much? Or what about if the environment we're in, right? Maybe we acquired a company. Culturally, we're very open to change and we're very dynamic. Whereas the company we're acquiring, maybe, no offense, maybe it's a German company where they have very rigid roles and responsibilities and they seek comfort in knowing I am this person, I'm the Meister, this is what I do, this is my role. And so how do we adapt that? I think the context is the most crucial thing. So my guidance really for listeners is a couple of things. So number one, we have an infographic, Markus. I'm hoping you can share it with the listeners after this session. When you post it, so they can basically just get an overview of what these archetypes look like. And really, I think that the key for every organization is to get a better idea or understanding of your workers. And amazingly, tools like Workato with Gen AI, with the automation capabilities, it becomes increasingly easy to start collecting this kind of information in a confidential, respectful way, right? But you can actually get a lot of this behavioral information. You can administer surveys very rapidly. You can collect baselines. Because the one assumption you should not be making, listeners should not be making, is that once we collect this baseline, this is an archetype, that's the way it's only going to be. In fact, some of our research that we're doing now, and I'll talk about that a bit later, is actually mapping how these archetypes can actually switch. So if we look at an individual at one point in a implementation, we implement certain enablement, right, targeted enablement for them. We come back in a month. Have they actually changed? And the intuition is that yes, in some cases there could be. Well, going back to your question, you look at business process owners, you do like technologies, and we're trying to break down those funnels, right? We're trying to break those silos. And I think the critical thing here is really understanding, number one, there's that sense of team identity and what a team has to achieve and its objective. And there's also the individual, right? And as much as we can, we're trying to align the individual, but let's also be practical, right? I have over 20 years of experience in industry. So while I love being a researcher, that's one of my identities, right? The professional side also tells me, is it practical? It's going to be very challenging to continuously baseline individuals. However, there's certain groups, there's certain teams that perform a unified function. And at the organizational level, you can actually abstract out those characteristics. So it should be fairly easy to obtain baselines of teams, key stakeholder groups. So every time, the guidance is you're about to implement, let's say you're an IT leader, right? A functional leader within an organization, you're about to proceed with a new implementation. Step one, identify the key stakeholder groups. Step number two, these simple surveys, questionnaires, very easy to administer, can tweak them a bit and you can administer them. Once you collect the feedback, you can start mapping some of these groups to those archetypes. And then the next step really is, armed with that information, there's guidance on how to alter or change your messaging, how to change your enablement. And the goal again is to get alignment, right? And so once you do it once you do it twice, you're never going to go back, because now you're really finding a way to cater the message, the value to the needs of the individuals. So it becomes like a flywheel.
Mm-hmm. No, look, I don't know how many of you guys in the audience also have participated in Myers-Briggs exercises among executives. I know I've done this at Workato. I've done it at Splunk, my last company. Just the recognition, like who is which personality type of the people that you work with, and the clarity in mind, and sharing this with other people also, and being transparent about it. I think that already just helps so much to align better. I can totally see this happening. And you said this. This can all change. Myers-Briggs personality types change over your career, over time, right? The other thing is, I have this this really cool story. It was my first project I ever did in my professional life, right out of college. Actually, I was an intern at the beginning of the project, and then we did it after I came back, finishing my studies. So we're going back to Germany. All right, this is me doing business process redesign at the largest telco in Germany, being part of a consulting company, and the funny thing was that we did a process analysis, and it came back and it was all good and people agreed to it. And then someone showed and said like, hey, look, we have this book here. And it's like what someone else had done, 500 pages. It was basically exactly the same processes. And so it looked like everything was for no reason. And, they had the solution already. But the thing is, just having done the analysis, nobody adopted it. It was there. And I do think that there was almost like this rejection of something that someone else had written up and just put out there. And it's like, it's not mine. And so what we actually did on the project, and it was a little bit of a miracle almost. Like we kind of did an approach where we said like, hey, from the whole company, let's find like 20 people in the company across all of Germany that want to work with us and want to build up these processes, but being a part of them. And not just us putting them out, but them being part of coming up with a solution and then going back to their units and becoming almost like multipliers. And I'll tell you what, it really worked. It was incredible. I mean, it took more effort and it took some sensitivity. But I do believe that, we didn't know all of these archetypes and so on back then, but I do think we probably got some of the early adopters, and we got some of the zealots, and we kind of like gelled them and aligned them, and then they've gone back and did more of the work out there, and it was magic. I mean, it really did work. So I'm actually curious. Do you have, part of the research that you've been doing? Do you have any other stories where some of this stuff, like really paying attention to these archetypes and identities, some reference cases where it actually worked and that people can take home as inspiration?
Yeah, so a couple of things to note. So the first one is that I come from a practical background. So, while academia is a lot of fun, I really embarked on this journey to try to solve a real problem. And in terms of, how we're able to adapt this, so I think the true value of I think how, compared to other large transformation programs or some new tool or new framework, right? What we're trying not to do is try to reinvent the wheel here. And a lot of the time, like even with my own personal experience at work, we're also working with a few companies right now. I can tease that a bit now. Working with a AI company, a pretty large company, also working with a fintech company to implement this framework. And the process is fairly straightforward, right? In terms of getting actual adoption, getting real measurable change, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing today is that, people, at the end of the day, we shouldn't be treating every single implementation as the same. I think organizations that do pretty well tend to be organizations that, hey, listen, we're going to go through all this transformation. We're going to do this change anyway. We have the resources lined up. We basically already have everything prioritized. There's a program in place, right? And so at this point, it's not really a question of when, it's really a question of how. And I think practically what's reduced a lot of the friction is not trying to make this a big thing, right? A lot of the time we've noticed when it comes to implementing this, you have your core team, call it a change management, call it an integration office, call it a PMO, right? These are the people we empower with this information. And ultimately, the people who end up tweaking, we're working with a company actually in France. It's part of a carve out. So there's a large financial company that's getting spun out, working with a management firm, like a technology consulting firm. And one of the key things again is managing the messaging with individuals. And the biggest insight really is, well, I've gone through some archetypes where the ITID is really high. There's actually archetypes, there's individuals who really don't care. And it's quite sad because we love technology. I think a lot of your listeners, including me, why I listen to your pod, is I like technology, right? I chose this as a career. But frankly, there are people who just really don't care, Sure, new tool, fine. So it also helps us to focus the lens on where we should be prioritizing the change. If people basically are just going to adopt, right? They're just basically going to use the new technology. Then make sure it's as clear cut, as straightforward as possible. Give them certain enablement tools, follow up. That shouldn't be the bulk of your change. People who aren't interested in technology, there's only so much you can do, right? It's the same thing as where you go into an organization, people clock in at 5 p.m., whistle blows, they clock out. It's very hard to change the perception and views of those people. So it also gives you, I think, a very firm grounding in terms of what you can accomplish. I think another thing that was also a really interesting, maybe learning moment, was really the technology piece. It isn't the most complex part of implementing change. It's really kind of navigating the hierarchy, the decision-making structures, the power dynamics of an organization. Now, again, this tool, it's not intended to be that big of a change for an organization. There has to be a context of a premise of a change, right? You're not going to implement this and then start looking, hey, what do we fix now? It's really something that's either underway or something that's about to be underway, and we're just trying to enhance, we're trying to change. So I think that's probably the biggest, I would say, message here, right? Like we're not trying to upend things. If anything, we're trying to build a capability. We're trying to basically enhance, and there's incremental value. That's the most amazing thing. Like I mentioned, the IT/ID dimension, that first one, it doesn't really change. So when you baseline certain groups, the next implementation, the next tool, there you're going to find a lot of similarities there. If your organization is very open to change versus not, then that's not really going to change a lot. Because like I said earlier in the pod, individuals who don't align with that organization's level and frequency of change, that magnitude of change, they tend to self-select out. That's a valuable data point when you do acquisitions, when you do cost consolidations, right? A lot of reasons why you would go to the board and execute an acquisition or a merger or a carve out. And so in those particular cases, you want to pay careful attention, what we call the culture, these external effects, we call them extrinsic effects. And then finally, the role, right? If you're the intuition is very simple, right? If you spend most of your time using this tool and we swap out the tool, of course you're going to be a lot more impacted than the individual who doesn't use the tool as much. So kind of like Myers-Briggs, but we're kind of really trying to look at, hey, here's you as an individual, here's the environment you're in, and here's your role as it relates to this tool. And so, hopefully with those three dimensions, we were able to target a bit more with greater accuracy to improve adoption.
No, makes total sense. I mean, it almost feels like what I was listening to that, and I was thinking, there's some people who are almost like influencers in the big world, right? There's some people who follow, who, as you said, they don't care too much, as long as you don't make their life difficult, they're gonna come along. But then there's some people who their weight is more, and you wanna, I guess, what you're saying is like focus your efforts on those people, and make sure that they their questions, their concerns are answered, or if they are positive, then they're supported and they can be influencers across the organization as well. Basically make them an ally.
Yeah, I agree. I think finding the right people to help spread your message, especially into their groups, right? I have a good friend who's about to embark as the head of security of a very large division of a top financial institution, and a big part of his role is rolling out change, this whole new framework. And the biggest challenge that he's encountering is logistically, practically, he's got a small team. How does he administer some of these concepts on a global scale, right? And I think the key thing is to identify, as you said, Markus, those key individuals who, for example, are in a position of trust. They're representative of their groups. If you can tailor a message to them, if you can win them over, then half of the battle, I argue more than half of the battle, is won, right? It's getting those influencers. And maybe so this tool can help you target what is required to convince those influencers, to get them interested, to get their self-interests aligned with what you, from speaking from the technology, from the IT side of the business, what you're hoping to achieve.
Mm-hmm. And then maybe just to share one last little story is, I spoke to a CIO some time back, and the conversation about Workato, and he said, like, look, I really like Workato, and I think it's gonna be a really helpful and for my organization. And then he kind of made the comment and said, like, but it's not gonna work the way it is right now. And it basically, he said, because I think, without saying it explicitly, without knowing your research, he actually applied your research, and he kind of came to the conclusion that the way the organization is structured, and he doesn't maybe have like this techno football. He doesn't have the people who would carry this along. And he actually made the comment. He said, like, Markus, give me 6 months. And because I really do believe in it, and I'll hire this person in this role with this characteristics, and then it'll work. And lo and behold, it actually did work out. So sometimes you have to maybe inject some of the right identities to kind of affect change.
I like that. I think the human element at the end of the day, that's really the goal. And I think what interested a lot of us to get into the industry, to do what we do, is because we are agents of change, and it's highly relevant at this time and place.
Mm. Well said. Well, I think, this was such a beautiful ending there. I think you summed it up. Listen, this was a fascinating conversation. Really, I'm thankful that you went out and did this research, invested 4 years of your life in it. I do think this is going to be super helpful for Workato, but any IT transformation project. We will make the infographic available as part of the podcast when we publish it, and maybe more people will come to you and ask for advice. So, hey, Tham, thank you so much. Thanks for being a Workato customer, and thanks for helping the community here.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. And just real quick, if any of your listeners are interested, feel free to reach out directly to me. The simple infographic is easy to digest, but we're really motivated as part of this community. We want to give back. This is I think a way all of us can help each other to move forward. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Please make sure to rate today's episode, leave us a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the show so you will never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.